Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first Sunset series of this year, or this season anyway. So this is the first one of a number running through until March in 2023. So hopefully we've got a packed schedule for you, and hopefully they're all interesting talks for everybody. We've got 32 people have joined us tonight from varying places, I'm sure, so lovely to see you all. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So everybody is muted, but the chat function is on. So if you want to ask any questions, please fire away on the chat. And we're going to, in a moment, I'll welcome Claire, who's going to be doing the talk this evening. At the end of Claire's talk, we'll have our usual Q&A, so everyone will be able to ask any questions. And if questions come up during the talk, please pop them in the chat, and we'll make sure that they're asked at the end. So I'm not going to do too much talking. Just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Mason, and I'm the CEO at Morecambe Bay Partnership. We've also got Michelle, who's here, who's also from the team, and Teresa, who's going to also wave. And Claire is also on our team, and Claire's going to be doing the talking tonight. So I will, with no further delay, I will introduce Claire, who is our Archaeology and Heritage Officer at Morecambe Bay Partnership. Claire's got an honours degree in ancient history and archaeology and a master's in archaeology and heritage. So we are in very, very good hands tonight. Is that wrong, Claire? I'm sorry, well, never mind. It sounded good. Some of it's right. So we're in really capable hands. So we're looking forward to hearing your talk, Claire. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I just want to clarify, I almost have a master's degree in it. I've done everything but submit the final dissertation. So it's not an entire lie.
Well, you're nearly there. That's the main thing.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. It's absolutely lovely to see everybody, and it's very nice to see some familiar faces. So I've been with the partnership for about 2 years now. I've been working on some absolutely fascinating projects. So tonight I was going to share the one that I've been working on most recently with you. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a bit about defending the docks. Defending the docks is basically, it's a military heritage community recording and education project. We've been working on this for a few months now. And what we're doing is combining traditional historical research skills with a bit of mathematical surveying and some innovative digital interpretation methods to make permanent record of the structures built to defend Barrow and Walney Island during the First and Second World Wars. Alongside the Channel Islands, this area has one of the most complete collections of historic coastal military defences in Britain. So it's a nationally significant area. It's amazingly important, and currently it's falling apart a little bit. So what are we doing? We are training volunteers, at least one of whom is on the call tonight. So absolutely brilliant to see them here. We're training them to identify the military heritage sites. We're training them to professionally record them, so photograph them, draw them, and fill in lots of monitoring forms, and also monitor how well that they are surviving. As anybody who's been to Walney will know, it's quite a blustery experience sometimes, and has quite a lot of strong tides, and so that contributes to the buildings falling down quite a lot. So we need to make sure we know what's happening to them. So as well as that, we're using all that information to create a publicly accessible archive of all of our findings on the Recording Morecambe Bay website, which I hope all of you are familiar with by now. And we're going to share that information with the public, like you, but with also with heritage protection and research organisations. So hopefully the research the volunteers are doing can contribute to us looking after some of these monuments a bit better. One of the exciting parts of the project is that our expert partners at LA12, who are a digital company based in Ulverston, are turning the records that we are making into an interactive virtual reality archaeology model and also 1940s experience, which I'm going to give you a bit of a peek at the end of the talk. So hopefully you look forward to that. As well as this, I'll also be giving talks like this one, visiting schools in Barrow and Walney, and we'll be holding an exhibition in Barrow to share the story more widely, probably in January. And the reason we're doing all of this is, well, the main reason is that we think more people should know about this fascinating history. Wonderful organisations like the Defence of Britain Project, ArtGene, Signal Film and Media, Cumbria Archive Service, a variety of individual historians and our own volunteers have spent years researching and publishing this story. But people are still really surprised to find out how well defended Barrow was in the Second World War, and they're sometimes a bit puzzled as to why. So mostly what remains are kind of scattered concrete blocks, tumble down buildings and rusty bits of metal. And these are all easy to overlook in the landscape. And for most people, they're quite difficult to interpret. So we're hoping the work that we're doing, especially the virtual reality model, will allow us to explain the purposes of these defences while people are viewing them, even if they can't actually visit them in person. And the model will give us the opportunity to immerse people in what the landscape would have been like at the time, so they can see all these structures as they would have been rather than the decaying mess in some cases that they are today. It also gives us the opportunity to understand the positions of these defences and training sites and how they interacted with each other, giving us a greater insight into how Barrow was defended. We're also quite keen to understand which of these defences are still visible today on the ground and what condition they're in. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later, but most of the military sites in the area, apart from some bits that have been intensively surveyed already, have been identified from aerial photos, some of them from 1946. And actually, sometimes until we go and visit them, we don't know if they're still there on the ground or not. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. But first, I'd like to give you a bit of an overview of the development of Barrow and how it came to be so heavily defended. So Barrow, not its original name, it's originally Barrow, was originally established as a grange, so sort of a large farm that was used by the monks of Furness Abbey. And it remained an absolutely tiny settlement of 5 houses, sometimes 8, but some of them were knocked down in the 18th century until about 1780. In 1745, the Back Barrow Iron Company began to occasionally ship iron ore here, which led a little bit to the slow addition of more housing, a grocer's shop and a general store. But it was only very sporadic that they were sending iron this way. It was the bits that they weren't being able to use locally, so they were exporting it through Barrow. In 1782, however, the Newland Iron Company made Barrow their main port. So they needed a few more facilities, a few more places for the workers to live, and with that, they started adding more shops for people to use who were living there. But still, looking at this is W.B. Kendall's map of Barrow from 1843. You can still see some of these buildings there today. They're by the old train station, if people are familiar with the area. It's quite difficult to imagine that 100 years later, the town would need one of the largest defensive networks in the country. The map does, however, give a little bit of a clue into the origins of Barrow's strategic value. So just here, on the maps, you can see the iron ore yards and the jetties that were put in to make exporting the ore easier, a more streamlined process. So these were built in the late 18th to the early 19th centuries, and they were originally shipping furnace ore to smelting works in Wales and the Midland. However, in the 1850s, the Furness Railway was expanded quite significantly, and a station was set up just by some of these iron ore yards. And this allowed more iron to be brought to the area and to have more of a local trading network. So one of the main drivers of this expansion was a gentleman called James Ramsden, and he was in charge of the Furness Rail Company. He had very ambitious plans for Barrow. The company bought up parcels of land to allow the expansion of the railway, first of all, so more people could be brought to the area, and more resources as well. And he also started buying up little parcels of land to be used for industrial purposes. Ramsden, this is his plan for Barrow from 1850. He proposed the building of a town with planned streets, so this a lovely little area here, and areas for foundries, and which is just over here, and the shipbuilding yards. He persuaded the Dukes of Devonshire and Buccleuch to fund the large system of docks with a vision of rivaling Liverpool in its, which was, as is now, a large port. Now, the Dukes were rather happy to oblige on this matter. The Duke of Devonshire had already been quite involved in funding the railway, so he was keen to expand his holdings a bit further. Also, both of these dukes held a lot of land in the area, and they would have received payments for iron ore that was extracted from their land. So they would benefit from streamlining the process of getting it out into the world and shipping it off. So to capitalise on this, in 1859, Schneider, Hannay and Company established an ironworks in Hindpool, and this marks the beginning of what would be the largest iron and steel works in the world. In 1865, Barrow Hematite Steel Company was incorporated, and the 7th Duke of Devonshire was the chairman. James Ramsden was the managing director, and Josiah T. Smith was employed as the general manager. And it seems that a lot of the industries in the town, the mayorships, were passed around a lot of the same names, and they're all the people with money who are investing in the town. So to take advantage of this wealth of production even more, in 1866 the company began converting the smelted iron to steel so that it could be sold at a higher price. If you have a finished product, it goes for a little bit more than the raw materials do. And this became a massive industrial work. So they had 12 blast furnaces going at the time, and they installed a lot of new machinery to smelt the steel. So they were producing thousands and thousands of tons of steel every year. So to aid the export of this material a little bit more, the docks were built. So the Devonshire and Buccleuch docks were constructed by a Mr. Brassey to James Ramsden's plans, and were opened in 1867. This is a lovely engraving from the Illustrated Times, and it shows the opening celebrations. This was followed a little bit later by the Ramsden Dock, which was built in the early 1870s. And this was deep enough to float the largest vessels in the world at the time. So they clearly had great expectations for this dock. The Barrow Steam Navigation Company used the dock for steamers, which sailed to Belfast and the Isle of Man. The Furness Railway Company then built a station on the dockside so passengers could easily access the steamers from the railway system. So the Furness Rail Company, who has ownership stakes in the railway, but also in the ironworks and in the docks. So they have ownership of most of the town at this point. And by 1871, the iron and steel works were the most productive in the world, mostly supplying rails for new train lines, and workers were coming from all over the place to work in the steel yards there. Production, however, was outstripping demand quite a lot at this point, and so the owners were looking for some new markets to expand into. So the Barrow Shipbuilding Company was founded to make use of the excess steam. The Barrow Shipbuilding Company built a variety of leisure and working boats, the first of which was the steam yacht Aries in May 1873. But they soon branched out into making gunboats for the Royal Navy. This was quite a lucrative occupation, as you imagine, and they brought experienced shipbuilders to the town from all over the place, a lot of them from Scotland, but from far and wide, and they soon became known for having very advanced designs. They were employing some of the best people in the country and from further afield. Unfortunately, despite this reputation, the shipyard was losing vast amounts of money. It was kind of, hemorrhaging cash all over the place. They had built some rather large docks after all. And so once again, they needed to diversify. So in 1886, the company launched its first submarine. It was designed and built for the Swedish industrialist Torsten Nordenfeldt, and it was sold to the Ottoman Empire. So this is the submarine here. It was christened the Nordenfeldt II, but when it reached Turkey, it was named the Abdul Hamid. This submarine became the first in the world to fire a live torpedo underwater. So yes, that claimed fame for Barrow. So they also built a second ship for the Ottomans, and they also sent one to be built one to be sent to Russia, but unfortunately that one foundered over Jutland and never actually arrived. But after this mostly success, the shipyard approached Nordenfeldt to ask him to invest in it to try and sort out some of their financial worries. Nordenfeldt agreed to this, and he did that on the basis that he would bring his expertise in gun design, so the company could begin producing armaments. And in 1888, the shipyard was renamed as the Naval Construction and Armaments Company. This diversification saw Barrow become the first shipyard in Britain able to build, engine, arm and armour a battleship in one place, which reduced production costs significantly and allowed the company to control the production from start to finish. The first of these commissioned was the HMS Vengeance, ordered in 1887 by the Royal Navy. Obviously, the Royal Navy had a need for all of those different features that Barrow Shipyard was providing, and saw it as a good opportunity to have their ships made in one place and again reduce costs for them. But unfortunately, by this time, Nordenfeldt had also run out of money, and his subsidiary company was taken over by American-born inventor of the first self-powered machine gun, Sir Hiram Maxim, in 1888. At the same time, the Sheffield-based steelmaking firm of Vickers, Sons and Company were drawn in by the prospect of being able to supply complete battleships to the Navy. Again, quite lucrative. And so they joined forces with Maxim to buy Barrow Shipyard. And when HMS Vengeance was launched in 1899, Vickers Sons and Maxim Limited were the shipyard owners. There were quite a few legal battles after that, but most of them are not particularly relevant to Barrow and were mostly about non-compete clauses with Nordenfeldt. So it was quite drawn out, but left the area. So in 1911, Vickers started expanding to aeronautics and rebranded themselves as Vickers Limited. They launched the HMS Vengeance, which you can see here, in 1899, and that was a roaring success. So in 1911, they took over their rival company, their biggest rivals, Armstrong Whitworth. In 1927 they did that. And the shipyard was at the cutting edge of naval technology. It specialised in warships, submarines, passenger liners and tankers, which in 1927 was going to come in useful quite quickly. Vickers had been employed by the British Navy to construct their warships as early as 1897, and they contributed substantially to the maritime war effort during both of the world wars. At the shipyard in Barrow, they employed 28,000 workers, which, considering the size of the town up to the 1870s, is fairly impressive. And the shipyard delivered a fleet of 64 new submarines for the First World War. With all these workers, Vickers saw the opportunity to build workers' housing as well. So not only did they own the shipyard, they also owned the places everybody lived too. They also owned the ferry that took people across to Barrow Island from the mainland, and were quite reluctant to have the bridge built, as they thought it was going to lose them income. But they did manage to put a toll on the bridge so they could continue charging people. So during the Second World War, Vickers continued producing armaments. They also produced 4 aircraft carriers, 2 cruisers, 12 destroyers, 89 submarines, 18 midget submarines, 11 cargo vessels, 2 transport ferries, 10 tank landing craft, and 8 motor landing craft, and 6 skids for the Navy. So yes, they had quite a prolific output during the Second World War, and were massively contributing to the success of the British Navy at the time. But Barrow's innovations weren't limited to watercraft. Some of you might be familiar with this airship. So in 1908, after years of experimentation, a German inventor successfully flew a rigid airship on a 240-mile trip from southern Germany to Zurich and back, and gained the attention of the German military. They then started producing more of these airships, and that understandably worried the British Admiralty. So what they did is they approached Vickers Barrow with a request for the development of a British airship to compete with the Germans. So the first Vickers-built airship was the HMA Hermione, or the Mayfly, as it was known by people who were non-commissioned officers. It was unveiled in 1910, but unfortunately when it was moved from its shed in Cavendish Dock to conduct full trials on the 24th of September 1911, it broke in 2 before it could attempt its first flight. Apparently it was as a result of being subject to strong winds, but there were some quite weak sections in the middle of the aircraft. The Germans got around this by using floating hangars, apparently, so they could turn it to launch with the wind. But they hadn't quite managed that in Barrow at the time. But Vickers did learn from this experience, and they successfully built several more airships in the town by the end of the First World War. So the steelworks and shipbuilding was a little bit quiet in the interwar period. There wasn't as much demand for the products, and so quite a lot of people were laid off in the intervening period. But at the outbreak of the Second World War, the Air Ministry launched the first part of what would become a massive programme of aircraft construction. So RAF surveyors descended on Barrow and identified Walney Island as the location for a new temporary airfield, which you can see in the image here. This one's somewhere between 1946 and 1955. So as you can see, not particularly temporary. So the construction of this began in 1940, and the airfield took the classic form of the 3 runways, that you can see, crossed to form a giant A, and there was also administrative and accommodation buildings just at the back here, much the same as in much the same position as they are today. And they were of the familiar Air Ministry style, so they included large numbers of Nissen huts and various other administrative buildings. Now, both RAF Barrow and RAF Cark managed to exploit the unique resources offered by Morecambe Bay. So these are the tidal mudflats. By the end of the war, the bay had in fact become one giant practice range for both air-to-air and ground-to-air gunnery. So they would they set up various tugs and also ground targets to fire at, and it quickly became one of the key training places where gunners were trained before they went off to fight over the continent. So the airfield at Barrow was specifically established as a site for air gunnery training, and so the same role was assumed at Cark after initial plans by Fighter Command to use the airfield were shelved following the RAF's victory in the Battle of Britain. You can see on the other side of the bay, there are still military remains at Cockerham. So you've got an observation post over there, and those would have interacted really nicely with all of the defences at Barrow, but also as practice for the air gunnery training. So to protect these shipbuilding capabilities and the new training school, extensive defence fortifications were built along the shore, and these make up a major part of the remaining military landscape. So in 1940, pillboxes were constructed along the western coast of Barrow, from Sowerby down to the tip of Walney. I'm afraid I couldn't quite get the tip of Walney on there, but I'll have some photos in a moment. And you can see the positions of these are marked on, this is the Electronic Defence of Britain map. So just to explain, the red icons on there are the features where the people doing the mapping think that the buildings survive. The yellow ones are ones that they have spotted from aerial photography, but they think that they've been removed since then. And you've got several different types of defence on there. You've got pillboxes coming all the way down the coast. You've also got air raid shelters, which you can see are the little ones that look like a little arch. But you've also got things like searchlight emplacements down here and across here. And you've also got coastal batteries. So these pillboxes were made to basically provide lookouts in case of invasion, mostly from the Irish Channel. That's where it was expected the invasion would come from. But there were others established to protect the Walney Channel, just down here around the docks, thus protecting the entry to the shipbuilding works of Vickers. A lot of these pillboxes, as you can see, are still in existence along the coast, but they are in kind of varying conditions. So just a couple of examples of this, of some of the ones that survive. These on the left, this one's down at just south of Sandscale Horse, you might be familiar with it. And this one is a type 20, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but it's a type 24 pillbox. So these are mostly hexagonal pillboxes, except they have this lovely flat front here, which is facing away from the coast. So they would have entered at the back, and then they would have pointed the weaponry out the front. So the embrasures on the front of these ones around the side here, are only suitable for rifles and light machine guns. So it's the kind of standard invasion defences, but then they're not necessarily expecting that that is going to be the main point of defence at this stage. And quite a lot of the pillboxes around on the coastal strip down from Sandscale downwards are of this type. Some of the others there are a bit more interesting. These are type 23 pillboxes, and these are rectangular structures which don't have quite so many of the embrasures. You can see this one's been filled in a little bit here, and you've also got one at the front of them. There is one around the other side which I think has also been filled in. But they also have these open bays at the top, and you can just see, hopefully, the tip of a concrete post poking up in the middle there. And so these would have been there to mount light artillery guns on. So these are much smaller than some of the ones that you might imagine if you're hearing about artillery, and they're aimed at protecting the area from lower flying aircraft. This one here is at the edge of Cavendish Park, and that's overlooking the old railway cutting there. So it's aimed at protecting the railway line. And I have heard tell there is actually a matching one on the other side of the bank, but that bit is so overgrown that we managed to poke it with a ranging rod, and there was some concrete there, but we couldn't really see it to record it at the time. As you can see, these ones are actually in quite good condition, although the type 23 pillbox does have a considerable amount of graffiti, and this channel here is kind of the entranceway is filled with rubbish. So it's not been the best looked after, but it's doing quite well considering how old it is. Some of the other defences in the area are rather more extensive. The pillboxes form a network of defence with overlapping fields of fire, but these, the coastal artillery searchlight emplacements, are a little bit more involved, shall we say. So this here on the left is Fort Walney. Some of you might have seen pictures of it before. We believe it's constructed for the First World War for the Lancashire and Cheshire Royal Garrison Artillery, and then modified for the Second World War. So the some parts of this are still standing on the current golf course in Walney, although obviously the extent of those buildings probably ruin your game of golf quite a lot. So quite a lot of the buildings have unfortunately gone. Part of this this structure is a training camp. So again, people would be stationed there and they would have been trained, but it was also armed with two 6-inch breech loading Mark 7 guns and was manned by the 299 battery of the 256 Coast Regiment until 1943. So it is, as well as being a training camp, it is an active defence point. The battery remained until the post-war period, and it was used as part of the Cold War defences as well, with the observation post until quite recently as a Coast Guard station. So still very helpful, lots of recycling going on. So what you've got here is a a battery which is aimed at defending against coastal invasions. As I say, it's got the quite heavy guns, which will repel quite a lot of the attacks. Fort Walney, as I said, has been extensively redeveloped, but some of the individual characteristics from the installation do still remain. There are still some fire watchers posts there, which were made by and for vicars during the Second World War, and 2 of which still survive in the area. And there are also some other survivals, like this on the right is a searchlight, one of the searchlight emplacements. And so they would have had their rather large light in the emplacement, and they would have directed that round to try and spot any enemy aircraft which might have been approaching. Pillboxes and other defences also survive in quite a lot of areas around Morecambe Bay, often at points of tactical significance. So again, cited assuming an invasion from the Irish Sea and heading inland. And so they're generally positioned along canals and waterways, for instance, along the Lancaster Canal, close to Glasson Dock, or at Hornby near one of the few crossings over the River Lune. But this concentration of sites is quite unusual. And just down there at the bottom, this is not actually a Walney example, but the remains that are still there are just kind of a little circle of bricks. But just to give you an impression, this is a spigot mortar post, and so people would have got in basically this hole which surrounded a concrete structure with an attachment on it, so they could rest their mortar on top of it, and it was designed to be portable, so they could take it away with them, and then they could go to one of these posts as needed to defend the area. And there is a tiny little bit of the remains of one of those around Fort Walney as well. The other coastal artillery station is the Hiltsford Battery, and as I said, this is down at the south end of Walney. You can see here part of the battery was the lighthouse, so you can see it here in these pictures. It's been camouflaged, so hopefully it won't be hit by enemy aircraft or boats at the time. But you can see in this bottom left image that there are quite a lot of the storage sheds in place there at the time of these pictures, which were in the 40s. And then this is a lovely image of the area from above. So you can see here the lighthouse with the camouflage. Ooh, clicking too much. The associated buildings, and also kind of the gun positions. So again, obviously the lighthouse is still intact, but a lot of the associated sheds, so these ones here, have been removed, but there are a few of the little stations that are still remaining. I believe this one is still in place now. Unfortunately, that bit is on private land, so it's a little bit more difficult to get access to, but it is one that has been photographed by people in the past. And one of the major stations on the coast, this is just opposite, if you're familiar with Walney, it's just on the opposite side to the Coast Guard station, so on the nature reserve opposite the officers there. And this is the HA5 battery, so the heavy artillery battery, and this was designed for much larger guns to be used. So this is an aerial image that was captured by a drone by Oxford Archaeology in 2018. And you can see here the remaining gun platforms. There's one here, one here, and one here. They would initially have been 5 of these. You can see the remains of another one just about there. and you can see they still have the fixings there to attach the guns. Around the side of this emplacement, you can also see they've got the ammunition stores in place on this one. We believe that the rest of these gun emplacements would also have had ammunition stores surrounding them, but unfortunately they've been washed away by the tide and coastal erosion. And you've also got on here some kind of ancillary buildings. There would have been a kind of main building, a command post that would have been in charge of the operations. But unfortunately, you can see a lot of that is floating away. And these would have been the heavy artillery station that would have been one of the main defences on the coastline. What we also have is a little bit of evidence that there were some decoy camps in the area. This is one we haven't quite located yet, but we think it's in South Walney. We have a vague location for it, and these would have been set up as fake camps to try and trick the Germans into bombing that instead of anything that was actually important. And you see they've gone to quite a lot of effort with these. They've set up huts, they've also set up searchlight areas, and also dug trenches, these zigzag lines here, to make it seem like it is in fact a real operating camp. And they were quite right to be worried about this. So this is a map from the archives here, and this is a plan of the town of Barrow in Furness. And as you can see, it's marked out all the dock areas, it's marked out where the shipyard works are, and where they're producing a lot of the armaments. And so this is a 1942 German map that they produced following doing some reconnaissance in prior to the war. So if you go on I couldn't get it to play today, unfortunately, but if you go on the Recording Morecambe Bay website, there's a lovely clip of Dennis Vaughan describing the time they saw the Graf Zeppelin flying over Barrow in the 1930s, and that it was quite an extraordinary sight at the time. And so they later realised they were doing recon to map out where all these important features were. Clearly, the defences were working to some extent, because during the war, although the shipyards and the railway line were bombed a little bit, they weren't bombed enough to cause a major disruption. So clearly some of those defensive placements worked out quite well. Unfortunately, what that did mean is that the town itself got hit quite badly. So the military significance of the region was obviously recognised by the Luftwaffe, and so the Furness Peninsula was the focus of, call it the Barrow Blitz. So between April and May 1941, 83 civilians were killed, 330 were injured, and several thousand homes were damaged or destroyed. The attack on Barrow Station on the 7th of May 1941 even managed to damage the First World War Memorial, which you can still see the scars of today. And although they did seem to be targeting the shipyard and engineering works, again, they all received, and the docks received direct hits. Again, the damage wasn't great enough to cause serious disruption. Barrow's close-knit terraces near the traditional workplaces, however, caught most of the bombing, and a few strays landed on the town's outskirts. Although, of course, while we're talking about not causing damage great enough to cause serious disruption, that's mostly focusing on the kind of the technical, the machinery that's been used to make things. It kind of forgets about the fact that the people living in the town are the ones who are actually operating those machines, and it will be some of them who won't be able to come into work, and also their morale will have tanked after being bombed so continuously over that time and losing so many people. So there was quite a bit of disruption, just not in the way people are usually thinking about it. So, as I said, we're surveying these military features because quite a lot of the archaeological records have been produced from looking at aerial photographs. The map locations aren't always particularly accurate, and some of the smaller installations will have been missed, and we don't necessarily know if they're there until somebody goes to look at them. We have done some detailed surveys already in South and Central Walney, but there are quite a lot of areas, particularly in Barrow, which have not been fully investigated. And the main reason that we really want to do this, this project now and get these remains recorded and monitored, it's things like this. So this is the HA5, the Heavy Artillery 5 battery I showed you earlier. You might remember that there was grass all the way down this slope in 2016. And also this particular gun emplacement was completely buried. So these monuments have decayed significantly over the last, how many years is that? 4 years. Things have been washed down the coast. A lot of these structures have been broken up. And and many of the buildings that we saw on the earlier aerial photograph, which were on the top of this hill, have now just kind of fallen down the slope. So these remains are being washed away as we speak. Every time I visit, every month or two, more and more of these structures are vanishing. There are also things like development tends to destroy some of these remains. So a few years ago, my predecessor Louise was involved in relocating one of the pillboxes from Barrow waterfront because the area was being developed and they wanted to preserve it. So they made a full record, but they managed to place it somewhere else, which is absolutely fabulous for preservation, but not necessarily so good with looking at where the features were and how they work together. So it really is a race against time to get these structures recorded so we can actually find out a little bit more about them. Okay, I've spoken for far too long, so I am going to leave you with a little example of our virtual reality, somebody using our virtual reality experience that takes you back to the heavy artillery battery in the 1940s. So I hope you enjoy this.
Please press any button on your controller to start. Welcome to Defending the Docks. During World War II, the shipyard at Barrow built and launched ships and submarines, crucial to the British war effort. This resulted in Barrow, the shipyard and docks becoming a target for nighttime bombing raids. To defend against attacks from the air and from the sea, buildings and military installations were set up across Walney and Barrow Island. Today, the remains of concrete structures that we see along the coastline once housed and operated. Barrage balloons, anti-aircraft guns, searchlights and other weapons. Let us go back in time to May 1941 to explore how the people of Barrow went about defending the docks. We will visit the heavy artillery battery and a searchlight installation at the south of Walney Island, and we will end our journey in the town following an overnight bombing raid.
Hey, I've been told to expect some visitors to the searchlight this evening. Ah, there they are. Come on, let's show you around, but please, don't touch. Aye, this is our light. This one here has 2 billion candle power. It does get very hot and noisy in here though when it's on. Light on!
Despite the efforts to defend itself, Barrow and its people suffered during the Blitz. As much as a quarter of the housing was damaged or destroyed, and many people were killed or injured. Through these difficult times, Barrow's docks, shipyard and the people of the town made a significant contribution to the war effort. Please press any button on your controller to start. Please press any button on your controller to start.
There we go. So that is the beginning experience that we're going to use in schools to introduce the topic. It's developed for younger people with maybe not quite so long attention spans, but we're keen to really immerse them in what it would have looked like at the time, so then we can go out and show them what is remaining on the ground, and they will get that impression of what it would have been like, rather than just seeing, oh, that's a fallen down building. So if anybody is interested in volunteering to do some surveying, or wants to come and have a look at the VR in its full glory, do get in touch with me, because we are always happy for people to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. That's brilliant. Really fabulous. I'm just putting your email address into the chat, if I can get it right. So if anybody does want to volunteer, they can get in touch with you. Yeah, that was absolutely fascinating, and that's the first time that I've seen the VR as well. So I think it's great. I'm sure that kids will love it. And actually, for those of us that didn't live through the war, don't remember it, it really does bring it to life. And the air raid siren is just chilling, isn't it? Really chilling. So yeah, great, really fantastic project. Thank you ever so much for sharing it with us.
We were trying to make it not too scary, because we didn't want particularly the younger kids to
yeah, it will be interesting to see the reaction, actually, see what people, how the kids react to it. But lovely. It's really, really good. So we've got a few questions in the chat, so let's see what we can have a look at. So pillboxes, are you an expert in pillboxes? Because
thank you, Michelle.
Yes, Michelle, thank you. How many do you know?
I am not an expert in pillboxes. I don't believe there are 23 types. There is various ones that are quite common. The most common ones are types 22 and 23. Yeah, they have. There is a wonderful website called the Pillbox Study Group, who have more detail on that sort of thing. I do, yes, I never thought I'd say this, but I do have a favourite sort of pillbox, and that is the Pickett's Hamilton Fort. And that's because actually it's retractable. They use it on airfields quite a lot, and so it uses hydraulics to retract the pillbox underground and then pop it back up when it's needed. So they're quite fun, but I haven't found any of those in Walney yet. So if anybody has seen one, do let me know.
Amazing. I think what's interesting is, for me anyway, that pillboxes are sort of part of life. They're just, you grew up
Absolutely.
seeing pillboxes and just seeing these concrete blocks, and just not really knowing that very few of the ones that I've come across have got any sort of interpretation on them. So you don't actually know what they are.
Absolutely.
So certainly there's a huge job of work there to be done to try and possibly interpret pillboxes, because there's clearly quite a lot of history behind them, and interesting stories as well. So
oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there was one I used to walk past on the railway line in Dereham every single day when I was in sixth form, and I just never gave it a second thought until I actually became an archaeologist and started working with a military archaeologist. So some of you might know Chris Kolonko. He actually has a fantastic website as well. If you look him up, he has lots of information about pillboxes on his website and would tell you far more than I could about it. But yes, to answer Michelle's other question, actually, I've just seen, sorry, who were they built by? They were designed by the MOD. So there were plans for standardised pillboxes across the country, but they were built locally by local people with local materials. And obviously, sometimes the terrain didn't necessarily match up to what the MOD had imagined them building them on. So you do get some interesting shaped kind of structures that don't quite fit with any of the plans. And again, as my friend Chris says, every pillbox is individual. They're all unique, but they are kind of ideally set to plans and then built locally by people with whatever material they have. Actually, you can see in the not the pillboxes, but the gun emplacements in the heavy artillery battery, quite a lot of the concrete on the underside is made up of these huge beach pebbles that were clearly just picked up locally and included in them, and they're all just kind of falling apart now. But they were only ever intended to be temporary installations. They weren't supposed to still be here 100 years later. So yeah, they did the job at the time, and that was really supposed to be the end of it. Yeah.
So Steve's got a question. Are there regional variations in pillboxes? Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely they are. I couldn't tell you what exactly they are, but I know there are some very interesting types around Yorkshire that just seem to be doing, as ever, they're doing things differently in Yorkshire. I can say that I'm from Barnsley. So yeah, and also along the Norfolk coast, they tend to go in for more, a lot more of the circular type of pillboxes, which most people tend to associate with the First World War, but some of them seem to actually be interwar a bit later. But they, contrastingly, they also start building the hexagonal Type 22 pillboxes in the First World War, which you don't usually see until the Second World War. So again, Norfolk, where I grew up, is also a bit weird. So there's a
whole world of pillboxes.
Yeah, there's absolutely a lot of local variation in them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And the question that I've got is how many, so the whole Barrow sort of complex, how many of the features, or are any of the features listed and therefore protected? Is a lot of listing gone on? Or are we trying to? No? Okay.
I mean, across the country, there are very, very few listed pillboxes. Until relatively recently, archaeologists haven't, I say relatively, in terms of archaeology, that's, 50 years or so, there hasn't been much of an interest in the more kind of modern structures. People like to list very old buildings or prehistoric monuments, and the newer things have been ignored. Now that is changing. There are now a lot of people who are interested in modern conflict archaeology and other kind of more of the modern things that are coming up and listing more and more buildings. So hopefully some more of them will be over time. The thing about listing is that they have to be an example that is nationally significant. And now I would very much argue that the ones in Walney and Barrow are nationally significant, but it usually requires somebody to put forward that case. And if there isn't the momentum behind it, then they often won't be listed. Often listing considerations are taken a little bit more seriously if it is the community that is asking for them to be listed, rather than necessarily the professionals, because I mean, we get excited about any old thing, so we'll we'll put anything forward for listing. But saying that, listing isn't the only way that these monuments are protected. So all of them are in the Historic Environment Record database, and so they are recognised by the county archaeologists as significant monuments, and so that is always taken into consideration when planning applications are put in. Of course, that doesn't prevent things like the tide taking them away, or the advantage with listing is that things like the graffiti and people running away with bits of target practice, that becomes illegal, whereas it isn't if they aren't listed. But having them recorded does afford them some protection, at least in the planning system.
Okay, and are there any other features outside of pillboxes in the Walney complex and Barrow complex that are listed? Any of the dock features that you're looking at?
That I can. Testing me now.
I don't mean to. It's just interesting, just because I know that listing is a way of preserving these historic features. So I'm interested to know just for now, but also from our project, whether an outcome of our project in future could be to suggest things for listing, so that they're
absolutely
for the future.
Yeah, that would be brilliant if we could get them listed. Great. The thing is, then people have to look after them. So
they do. I know, and that's a challenge. It is a challenge. But still, there's a good reason to protect them. They're part of our heritage, aren't they? So they should. Some of them things should be protected. So excellent. We can probably carry on this conversation in a work capacity in the daytime. We're taking up everyone's time this evening, but no, that's really useful, Claire. Thank you. So no more questions in the chat. So I presume that everybody has had a. Oh no, there's one from Steve. Will there be a conservation management plan? Oh, what do you mean by that, Steve? Do you mean for the actual things that we're looking at? Yeah.
So I think Steve would probably be. We produced a conservation management plan for Warton Crag a couple of years ago, and that is aimed at trying to help people landowners and also local volunteers to look after the site. We do have a conservation statement about the South Walney kind of buildings, which does have recommendations which would be quite similar to a conservation management plan. We haven't got one more generally, but it would be really great to get one written, really. One of the problems with that is obviously a lot of the mapped remains are on BAE land, and so although they have been very supportive of the project and they've been really keen to get us to come and have a look at them, I don't know how much mileage there would necessarily be in me telling them what to do with their historic remains. But I will question them about it.
Yeah, it's worth looking at, isn't it? Definitely. Yeah, great. Thanks, Steve, for that one. Okay, it looks like we are done with Q&A. So thank you, Claire. It was brilliant. I think everyone has really enjoyed that. It was really interesting. Who knew that there was so much to learn about Barrow and its historic docks. So thank you, and good luck with the rest of the project from everybody, I'm sure. And hopefully there'll be a lot of interest from the young people in Barrow, and particularly the school children. And the VR thing is fabulous. So
Yes, we had an earlier version we demonstrated at the Dock Museum a few, it was last month now, time flies, and yeah, people were really impressed with it, although a lot of the time it was the adults who were getting very excited, wanting to stay and do it.
Well, that's good. I think
yes,
anybody that's interested is great. So
definitely, yeah,
fabulous. Thank you. So thank you everyone for coming this evening. Just a reminder that the next talk in the programme is on the 29th of November, same time, 7 o'clock, and it's by Cal Major, and she's an ocean adventurer, and she's going to be talking about paddling against plastic. So we're really looking forward to that on the 29th of November. We'll hopefully see you all then, but in the meantime, lovely to see you all. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you soon.